The morning sun had barely risen, casting a soft orange glow over the private airstrip. The small, sleek plane sat in the hangar, its polished surface glinting in the light. It was a quiet day at the airport, the kind where everything seemed to move slower than usual, giving an almost peaceful vibe to the busy industry. But inside the airport, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Samantha was nervously preparing for her first shift. It wasn't her first time as a flight attendant, but it was her first assignment with a high-end aviation company, flying on a private charter. She'd only heard whispers about the level of clientele the company served, celebrities, CEOs, and other high-profile figures. It was a world far removed from the routine commercial flights she was used to, and she wasn't sure what to expect. As she went through the checklist for the flight, she glanced over at the small group of crew members who were still bustling around. The pilots had already arrived, running through their pre-flight checks. One of the co-pilots, a seasoned veteran, walked by, nodding to her with a friendly but quick smile. Samantha returned it, feeling a little more at ease. "Everything looks good, right?" she asked, double-checking her station. She was determined to get everything right, but there was an undeniable weight of anxiety that came with this new role. "Looks perfect," the co-pilot said, his voice warm and reassuring. "You're good to go." As the passengers started to arrive, Samantha stood by the entrance, scanning the faces of each person who walked up. She wasn't sure what to expect. She had been told only that they were hosting an important guest, but no one had given her specifics. Her role was to make sure everything went smoothly, and she planned to do just that. The first passenger boarded the plane quietly, his footsteps light as he walked through the cabin. He was dressed simply in jeans and a jacket and had a calm, unassuming presence. Samantha, who had been expecting a flashy arrival given the nature of the job, was surprised. He didn't carry any of the usual marks of a celebrity or high-profile figure. He wasn't surrounded by security. No assistants or entourage flanked him. She glanced at the boarding list, but his name didn't seem to stand out. In fact, it wasn't a name she recognized at all. He was just another face in the crowd, or so she thought. "Good morning, sir," Samantha greeted him, her voice steady. "Welcome aboard. Please feel free to make yourself comfortable." The man smiled, nodding politely. "Thank you." His voice was calm, easygoing, as if he had all the time in the world. Samantha showed him to his seat, feeling a bit more at ease. The flight was small, just a few passengers. It was a smooth, quiet ride on a private plane, and she liked the idea of being able to give personal attention to each person on board. As the rest of the passengers boarded, Samantha went through her usual routine, checking in with the pilots, making sure everyone was seated and had everything they needed. The man, who had already settled into his seat, glanced around occasionally, but otherwise seemed perfectly content to just sit quietly, his eyes drifting lazily out of the window. Samantha thought little of it. She had no idea who he was, but there was something about him that felt different. He didn't seem to care about the usual trappings of fame or luxury. In fact, he seemed almost out of place in the lavish surroundings of the private jet. It was as if he was just a regular person, traveling for reasons that had nothing to do with the lavish comforts around him. The flight took off smoothly, and the plane began its ascent into the sky. Everything was in order. Samantha felt the tension in her chest ease, her nerves calming with the rhythm of the aircraft. But then, as the plane leveled out, something unexpected happened. The man, still seated near the front of the cabin, unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. Samantha noticed, frowning slightly. "Sir, please remain seated with your seatbelt fastened," she called out, trying to sound as polite as possible. He nodded, a soft chuckle escaping his lips. "Of course, just thought I'd check on something." He walked down the aisle toward the cockpit. Samantha's eyes widened. No one was supposed to approach the cockpit unless they were authorized crew. She had been told repeatedly during her training that passengers should stay in their seats once the plane was airborne, for their own safety. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, walking quickly to intercept him. "You can't be near the cockpit." He turned to face her, looking mildly surprised but not at all defensive. "I'm just checking on something," he said, his voice low and calm. "It's nothing to worry about." Samantha, unsure of how to handle this, stood firm. "I'm sorry, but I have to insist that you return to your seat," she said, her tone more authoritative now. He seemed to consider her words for a moment before nodding, a soft smile on his lips. All right, I'll go back." Samantha breathed a sigh of relief as he returned to his seat, taking his place without another word. She moved back to the front of the cabin, glancing at the pilots who were still focused on their instruments. The tension in her shoulders remained, though. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. But what? The man was just being polite, trying to help, or at least that's what he seemed to be doing. Why had she reacted so strongly? Maybe she was overthinking it. After all, she was just following procedure. Still, she couldn't help but wonder who he was. What was his story? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the intercom coming on. "Attention, flight attendants." The captain's voice crackled over the speaker. "We've encountered a little turbulence ahead. Please secure everything and return to your seats." Samantha nodded and began walking down the aisle to double-check that everything was secured. As she did, she noticed the man was now standing again, walking toward the front of the cabin. This time, she didn't wait. "Sir, please stay in your seat." "We've been advised to buckle up," she said, her tone firmer this time. He turned to face her, his expression unchanged, but something in his eyes seemed different now. "I understand," he said, his voice soft but carrying a certain calmness that was almost unnerving. "I was just helping the others with their drinks," Samantha's brow furrowed. "I appreciate that, but passengers aren't supposed to be serving others," she said. "Please return to your seat." "I understand," he repeated, his face betraying no frustration, but there was a slight flicker of surprise. It was as though he hadn't expected the pushback. Still, he quietly walked back to his seat, settling down once more. Samantha continued her rounds, but her mind kept drifting back to the man. Something about him didn't fit the usual mold of a passenger. He wasn't rude or demanding like some wealthy clients could be. In fact, he had been nothing but polite, but was that it? Had she just overreacted? Or had she made a bigger deal of it than she needed to? The flight continued uneventfully after that. But as they neared the final leg of their journey, Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that she'd encountered something unusual. She couldn't have known then just how much that feeling would grow in the next few hours. As the plane cruised steadily at 30,000 feet, the hum of the engines seemed to calm everyone on board. The occasional chatter from the passengers had died down, leaving only the soft murmur of the air conditioning and the clink of glasses as Samantha moved through the cabin. It was a smooth flight now, but Samantha couldn't help but feel a gnawing sense of unease, something she couldn't quite place. It wasn't the turbulence, and it wasn't the quiet nature of the flight either. It was something about the man who had boarded the plane earlier. He'd seemed perfectly polite, well-mannered even, yet there was something about him that just didn't sit right. He didn't fit the usual pattern of wealthy passengers, the ones who expected to be treated like royalty. Most of them carried an air of entitlement, often asking for the best seat, the best food, and the best service. But this man? He had been different. He didn't act like someone who was used to luxury. He wasn't loud, he didn't make demands, and he didn't expect anyone to recognize him. Samantha found herself replaying the interaction over and over in her mind. Was she just being too cautious? Had she misunderstood his intentions? Maybe he wasn't trying to overstep. Maybe she was simply being too rigid. She had been taught during her training to always enforce the rules strictly. Passengers were to remain seated once the plane was in the air. They were never allowed near the cockpit unless they had clearance, and no one was supposed to be serving drinks or moving around unless it was part of the crew's duties. But there was something about the way the man had moved, so effortlessly without any air of arrogance. He had seemed like someone who didn't care about the rules yet was never rude about it. Samantha's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps coming up the aisle. The man was walking toward her again. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm, with that same gentle smile. "Would it be possible to get some more water? I think I drank all mine too quickly." Samantha hesitated. He wasn't asking for anything extravagant, just a simple request for a refill. But after the earlier incident, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She knew he wasn't a threat, but there was something in his demeanor that made her second-guess herself. "Sure," she replied, forcing a smile. "I'll get that for you right away." As she walked to the back of the cabin, her mind raced. Was she being too strict? Was she overthinking things? She couldn't help but compare this man to the other passengers she'd flown with. They were either rude, demanding, or so distracted by their own lives that they didn't even notice the staff around them. But not this man. He was different. He seemed too calm, too composed. When she returned with his water, he looked up at her with a grateful smile. "Thanks," he said softly. "I appreciate it." Samantha nodded, offering him the glass, but she still couldn't shake that feeling of unease. He was just a man, right? But then why did she feel like there was more to him than met the eye? The flight continued without incident, and Samantha moved through her duties as usual. She noticed the man checking on the other passengers, offering to help with things like getting bags from overhead compartments or offering assistance to a woman who seemed nervous about the flight. He did it all without a single word of complaint, without asking for anything in return. Samantha watched him closely, trying to figure out what made him tick. He seemed so normal, so human. It was unsettling. She had seen so many passengers over the years, each one with their own quirks, their own demands. But this man, this quiet, polite man, was different. There was something magnetic about his calmness, about his ability to move through the cabin without drawing attention to himself. But why? She caught a few more glimpses of him during the rest of the flight. He was sitting back in his seat now, staring out the window. His expression was one of quiet contemplation, as if he was lost in his own thoughts. He wasn't reading a book or scrolling through his phone like so many other passengers did. He simply sat there watching the world go by outside the window. Samantha felt herself staring at him, caught in the rhythm of his calmness. He was peaceful. There was no rush in him, no urgency. It was as if he had all the time in the world, and nothing could disturb his tranquility. And then she had another thought. What if he was just like the rest of the rich, famous people she had served? What if he was just putting on an act, pretending to be humble and grounded to impress the crew? Maybe he was used to manipulating people, playing the part of the nice guy to get what he wanted. But no, that didn't seem right. She had been around enough wealthy passengers to recognize the difference. The entitled ones didn't need to pretend. They didn't need to act humble. And yet, Samantha caught herself again questioning her own instincts. Why was she putting so much thought into this? Maybe he was just a regular guy. Maybe he was a businessman or someone who preferred to stay low-key. Maybe he didn't want the attention. The more she thought about it, the more confused she became. She had been trained to stick to the rules, to enforce the protocol. But she had also been taught to read people, to understand the unspoken cues that could tell her more about a passenger. And right now all the cues were telling her about nothing. That's when it happened again. The man stood up. Samantha, seeing him rise from his seat out of the corner of her eye, couldn't help but feel a flash of irritation. She had just asked him to stay seated earlier, and now he was getting up again. "Sir," she began, walking toward him quickly. "You need to stay in your seat, please." He turned, looking at her with the same easy smile he had given her the first time they spoke. "I was just getting a blanket from the back," he said calmly. Samantha blinked, confused. There was no blanket service at this stage of the flight. But before she could say anything, the co-pilot, who had been watching the exchange from the front, stood up and spoke in a low voice. "It's all right," he said to Samantha, offering a reassuring smile. "He's just helping the crew." Samantha felt a sudden rush of embarrassment. She didn't know what had come over her. She was just trying to keep things running smoothly, but now, her overreaction had become too obvious. The man didn't seem offended at all, still offering her that gentle smile. "It's really okay. I don't mind helping," he said. Samantha gave a hesitant smile back, her face flushing slightly. She nodded, walking away quickly. It wasn't until later, as the flight began its descent toward their destination, that she allowed herself to truly reflect on the strange encounter. Was she being too strict, or was there something else about him that she hadn't yet figured out? She didn't know, but she would soon. She could feel it. As the plane began its final descent, Samantha moved through the cabin once more, ensuring that everyone was securely fastened and ready for landing. The turbulence had been minimal and the passengers seemed at ease. Yet, despite the calm surroundings, a sense of unease continued to linger in her mind. She couldn't stop thinking about the man. The more she tried to shake it off, the more questions popped into her head. Who was he really? What did he want? And why had she felt so unsettled by the way he moved through the cabin, like he belonged but didn't? Samantha reached the front of the plane, where the pilots were preparing for landing. She knocked lightly on the door to let them know she was finished with her checks. As she turned to head back down the aisle, she saw the man again. He was standing near the front of the cabin, casually talking to one of the flight attendants who was helping with the final preparations. Samantha froze for a moment, watching them. He didn't seem like the kind of person who'd be involved in the operational side of the flight. He wasn't an official crew member, and yet there he was, mingling, talking to the staff as if he had every right to be part of it all. It irritated her. She knew she shouldn't be so bothered by it, but she couldn't help it. There were rules for a reason. She took a deep breath, trying to shake off the nagging feeling in her chest. This was her job. She had to be professional. The man noticed her looking and smiled, a simple, warm smile that didn't carry any arrogance or malice. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice as calm as ever. Samantha nodded quickly, a little too quickly. "Yes, everything is fine. Just a few more checks." She forced a smile, trying to push the irritation down. He didn't seem to notice her discomfort. Or if he did, he didn't let on. "You know, you've been doing a great job," he said. "I've noticed how well you've handled things." Samantha blinked. Thank you," she said, unsure of how to respond. It was a strange thing to hear, especially from a passenger. Most people, even the ones who were well-mannered, didn't go out of their way to compliment the staff. But there was something in the way he spoke, something that made her question if this was all a game to him. Was he trying to charm his way into good graces? Just as she was about to answer, there was a loud chime from the cockpit. The captain's voice came over the intercom, smooth but urgent. "Attention, flight attendants," he said. "We are preparing to land in about 10 minutes. Please make sure the cabin is secured and everyone is ready for arrival." Samantha turned quickly, her mind refocusing on her duties. She gave the man a brief nod, making her way toward the back of the cabin. The passengers were now settling into their seats, buckling up as they prepared for landing. The man returned to his seat, as if on cue, without another word. She watched him for a moment, her curiosity piqued. There was something about him that made her wonder if she'd missed something crucial. When the plane touched down smoothly, she was relieved. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly, but that uneasy feeling still gnawed at her. She made her final rounds, checking that all the passengers had their belongings and were ready to disembark. She looked back toward the front of the plane to see the man standing once again, this time near the exit. Her first instinct was to ignore him and get on with the disembarking process, but something in her gut told her this wasn't over yet. She walked over to him, her steps more purposeful than before. He was talking to one of the other passengers, a woman who looked slightly anxious, offering her words of reassurance. The woman smiled and nodded, seemingly grateful for his kind gesture. Samantha approached, trying to sound as professional as possible. "Sir, we've arrived. Please remain seated until we're at the gate." The man turned to her, looking mildly surprised but not annoyed. He held up his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Of course, just wanted to make sure everyone was okay. It's a long flight, you know?" Samantha didn't know how to respond to that. He wasn't wrong, but this wasn't normal. "You've already done more than enough," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Please take your seat. We'll be off the plane soon." The man paused, then nodded. All right. I'll be seated in a second." But as he turned to walk back to his seat, he stopped again, looking toward the front of the cabin. He paused for a moment, deep in thought, before his eyes shifted to the cockpit door. It was opened slightly, the pilots chatting quietly as they prepared for the gate. Samantha watched his gaze follow the direction of the door, a small frown crossing his face. It wasn't a suspicious look, just curious, almost too curious. It was as though he was about to make a move but stopped himself at the last second. "Everything all right?" she asked, stepping forward once more. He turned to her, his face smooth, but the tiniest flicker of something passed through his eyes. "Just wondering," he said quietly. "Do you know who owns this plane?" Samantha blinked, unsure of where this was going. It's part of a private charter fleet," she said, her voice unsure. "I don't know the specifics." He said, his voice thoughtful. "It's just an interesting plane, isn't it?" Samantha was about to ask him what he meant when the other flight attendants began ushering the passengers toward the door. She took a step back, allowing them to disembark. The man stood by, waiting his turn, still smiling faintly. He seemed almost out of place here, a person who belonged in a world of high society but didn't care about the usual power dynamics. But the more she observed him, the more it dawned on her something was wrong. After a few moments, as the passengers filed off the plane, she walked toward the cockpit to double-check the flight logs. As she passed the galley, she overheard a conversation between two of the ground crew members. "I heard they just landed. one of them said. No more surprises today, right? The other chuckled. Not unless you count the boss walking off the plane himself. I'm sure he'll be thrilled about it. Yeah, the first one replied, when he hears the crew was treating him like a passenger. Samantha froze. The boss? She repeated, confused. The second crew member chuckled again. Yeah, didn't you know? That guy was the owner of this whole plane, and the whole fleet. It's his company, just one of the perks of the job, I guess. Her heart sank as the realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She had just treated the owner of the entire aircraft like an ordinary passenger. The man who had been so calm, so polite, had been the owner all along. And she had asked him to sit down, told him he couldn't help, and practically ordered him to follow the rules. She had no idea. Samantha stood there frozen for a moment. She hadn't just made a mistake. She had just done the one thing no one in her position should ever do. She had crossed a line and she hadn't even realized it until it was too late. Samantha stood there, her mind racing. The realization hit her hard. The man, the one she had been so confused about, the one she had treated with suspicion and doubt, was the owner of the plane. The owner of the entire fleet, in fact. She felt a flush of embarrassment rush to her face. She couldn't believe it. How could she have been so unaware? Of course, the way he had moved around the cabin, the way he had interacted with the crew, it all made sense now. He wasn't trying to be a bother. He wasn't acting out of place. He was simply himself. And she had assumed he was just another passenger, the same as everyone else, but now that she knew the truth, she couldn't stop the flood of self-consciousness that came rushing in. The flight had landed. The passengers were disembarking, and the crew was already getting ready to leave. Everyone seemed to be going about their business as usual, but Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that she had made a huge mistake. She felt like she had just embarrassed herself in front of someone who didn't deserve it. Her thoughts were interrupted by a light tap on her shoulder. She turned around to find the same man standing behind her. His calm, easy smile was back, but there was no sign of anger or frustration in his expression. He didn't look offended, just amused. I think you owe me an apology, he said, his voice low and friendly. Samantha's heart skipped a beat. She could feel the heat rise in her cheeks again, but she swallowed her nerves. I didn't know, she stammered, trying to find the right words. I'm sorry. I didn't realize who you were. I was just doing my job, but I should have treated you with more respect. He tilted his head slightly, his smile softening. It's okay, he said. I wasn't expecting special treatment, but I appreciate your honesty. Samantha looked at him, trying to read his face. Was he mocking her? No, he didn't seem like the type. But why didn't he seem angry? Why wasn't he upset with her for treating him like any other passenger? He noticed her hesitation and spoke again, his tone reassuring. Look, it's easy to get caught up in the routine, right? You see someone in a seat, you assume they're just another passenger. You didn't know. It's fine. She nodded, still feeling uncomfortable but relieved at the same time. He wasn't angry. He wasn't looking for revenge. He was being understanding. It was a little surreal, honestly. She had expected him to be upset. Most people would be. I've been in your shoes before, he continued, in your position. I know how it can feel like everything is running on autopilot, and you don't always have time to figure out who's who. He paused for a moment. And honestly, I'm glad you didn't know. It's easier that way. No one treats you differently just because of your status. Samantha felt a small sense of relief wash over her. At least he wasn't making her feel worse about the whole thing. Still, she couldn't help but ask, why didn't you say something earlier? You could have told me who you were, right? He chuckled softly, a warm, genuine laugh that made Samantha feel a little more at ease. I guess I could have, he said, but I didn't want to make things awkward. I've seen how people act when they find out who I am. It's like they suddenly change the way they treat me. I didn't want that. I just wanted to enjoy the flight like anyone else. Samantha blinked, surprised by his answer. Most people in his position would have used their power to get special treatment. They would have expected it. But this man, he just wanted to blend in, to be treated like everyone else. It was humbling. He noticed her surprise and raised an eyebrow. You look surprised, Samantha smiled awkwardly. I guess I am. Most people would have said something right away. He shrugged, the smile still in place. I'm not like most people. For a moment, they stood in silence, just looking at each other. Samantha wasn't sure what else to say. What could she say? She had just treated him like any other passenger, and now he was standing here, not holding it against her, not making a scene. "I'll tell you what," he said after a pause, breaking the silence. "I'm not looking for an apology, really, but if you ever want to make it up to me, maybe you could let me buy you a drink sometime. I know a great little spot near the airport. We can talk about the flight, and you can tell me how to avoid getting caught in the same situation again." Samantha couldn't believe what she was hearing. Was he joking? Was this a test? She couldn't be sure, but the way he said it made her feel like he was being completely genuine. He wasn't trying to make her feel small. He wasn't using his position to make her uncomfortable. I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice quiet. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "It's just a suggestion." Samantha smiled, feeling the last of her tension slip away. "Well, in that case, I'll take you up on that offer. Maybe we can talk more." He smiled back, his eyes lighting up with a hint of amusement. "It's a deal then. I'll text you the details." Samantha nodded, still processing the unexpected turn the conversation had taken. She had been prepared for a reprimand, for a scolding, maybe even for an uncomfortable silence. Instead, she had been met with kindness and understanding. "All right, I'll hold you to it," she said, still feeling a little unsure. Before she could say anything else, the door to the plane opened, signaling the last of the passengers were off. The man gave her a nod, his expression still calm and friendly. "I should go," he said, turning to walk toward the jet bridge. "I'll see you around." Samantha watched him leave, her mind still spinning. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She had treated him like any other person on the plane, but he hadn't treated her like an employee or someone beneath him. Instead, he had treated her like an equal, like a human being, something she wasn't used to in this industry. She turned to head back toward the rest of the crew, but her thoughts were still tangled in confusion. How could someone so powerful, so important, be so humble? Most people in his position wouldn't have acted like that. They would have expected special treatment. They would have expected to be treated differently. But this man, he had expected nothing. And yet Samantha felt like she had just experienced a lesson in humility that she would never forget. The next few days were a blur for Samantha. The flight had ended, the passengers had disembarked, and she had gone home after a long day, still processing everything that had happened. The encounter with the man, the owner of the plane, stuck with her. She kept replaying the moment over and over in her mind, wondering if it had been a dream. Could someone really be that kind, that understanding? Could someone in his position really care about someone like her? The following week passed without incident. She had kept herself busy with the usual routines of her job, checking in passengers, guiding them to their seats, ensuring safety measures were followed. But every now and then, her thoughts would wander back to that day. She hadn't expected to hear from him again, but something about the way he had left the conversation open, something about his offer to buy her a drink, made her wonder. She never thought she would get a chance to see him again. And yet the universe had a way of surprising her. One evening, while she was sitting in her small apartment after a shift, her phone buzzed. It was a message, and as soon as she saw the name pop up on the screen, her heart skipped. It was from him. "I hope you're doing well. Remember that drink I promised? How about this weekend? I know a quiet spot with a great view. Let me know what you think. The owner." Samantha stared at the message for a long moment, not sure how to respond. Was this really happening? Was he serious, or was he just being polite? She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than she had originally realized. The curiosity that had been eating away at her ever since that flight resurfaced. After a deep breath, she typed back, "I'd like that. Saturday works for me. What time?" A few seconds passed, and then the response came. "Great, let's meet around 7. I'll send you the details. Looking forward to it." Samantha set the phone down, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This wasn't just about a drink anymore. This felt like something more, something she didn't fully understand yet but was ready to discover. Saturday arrived with the usual pace of a busy day. Samantha found herself running around, doing last-minute errands, trying to balance the anticipation with the need to stay focused. She tried not to think too much about it, but it was impossible. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the man, to the way he had been so different from what she expected. He wasn't like the others, the ones who expected special treatment or used their status to get what they wanted. He was humble, kind, and he had treated her with respect. By 6:45 p.m., she was dressed in simple yet stylish clothes, ready for whatever was coming next. The address he had sent her led to a small, quiet bar near the water. It wasn't flashy, but it had a cozy, warm feel to it. When Samantha walked in, she immediately saw him sitting at a table by the window looking out at the view. He was dressed casually, a far cry from the powerful image she had imagined when she first saw him on the plane. He looked normal, like anyone else. She walked over, feeling slightly nervous but doing her best to stay calm. As soon as he saw her, his face lit up with a friendly smile. "Hey, you made it," he said, standing up to greet her. Samantha smiled back, feeling a little more at ease now that she was face to face with him. "I wouldn't miss it," she replied. "Thank you for the invitation." He gestured for her to sit. "Of course. I'm glad you came." He paused, studying her for a moment. "I know I might have caught you off guard that day on the plane. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable or out of place because of it." Samantha shook her head, brushing off his concern. "Honestly, I'm still surprised by how everything went down. You didn't have to be so understanding. Most people would have been upset," he smiled softly. "It's just not my style. And I understand why you acted the way you did. It's easy to forget that not everyone is who they seem to be." Samantha looked out the window, taking in the view. The sun was setting, casting a beautiful orange glow over the water. It was peaceful, and for the first time in days she felt a sense of calm. They chatted for a while about the usual small talk at first, the weather, her work, his work. She learned that his company wasn't just about planes. He had interests in a variety of businesses, though he rarely mentioned them. He told her how he valued simplicity and the ability to live a quiet life, away from the chaos of fame and wealth. The more he spoke, the more she realized how much he valued his privacy and the human connections that came without expectations. He didn't seem like someone who needed the constant attention of others. He was content with just being himself. As the night wore on, their conversation turned more personal. Samantha opened up about her life, her experiences, the reasons she became a flight attendant in the first place. It wasn't just about the job. It was about the people she met, the stories she got to hear. Every day was an adventure, and that's what she loved most about it. "I think I can relate," he said after she shared her story. "I've always been interested in people, in their lives, their stories. You can learn a lot from just listening to others." She smiled, feeling a deeper connection with him now. "I agree. Sometimes people don't realize how much they have to share until someone actually listens." They spent the rest of the evening talking about their lives, their dreams, their shared love for traveling and exploring. It was a conversation that felt natural, easy. The tension from their previous encounter was completely gone, replaced by a genuine sense of comfort. As the night came to a close, he offered to walk her to her car. When they reached the door of the bar, he turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "I'm glad we had the chance to do this," he said. "I know it might have seemed strange at first, but sometimes it's the unexpected moments that turn into something worthwhile." Samantha nodded, agreeing completely. "I never would have guessed I'd be here tonight talking to you like this," he smiled. "Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it?" They exchanged goodbyes, and as Samantha walked to her car, she felt a strange sense of fulfillment. What had started as a simple misunderstanding had turned into something meaningful. It wasn't about status or wealth. It was about human connection, the ability to look beyond the surface and see people for who they really were. Samantha drove home that night, her mind swirling with new thoughts. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She had just experienced something rare. She had met someone who had shown her what it meant to be humble, to be real, and she was grateful for it.